Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears. In today's second segment, we will look at the Emperor's New Clothes, which I've renamed as The Emperor Without a Spine. We will continue with the same format, starting with the summary and highlighting the main points. Then a critical reflection and how it plays in society today, and the trigger points. And a quick note, the sound will be restored to normal as soon as possible. Let's begin. The emperor was blinded by his superficial appearance of elegance and prestige. He was so enamored with his clothes that it was a vulnerability exposed for all the world to see. The reflection of his image was key to his existence. He had no interest in anything else except for the position he assumed as king. Responsibilities of duties fitting his office were mere props for him to use as he could look important. This reminds me of something that Vladimir Putin said, I digress people, about a former president who will remain unnamed. He referred to him as a shiny object in Russian, and this former president thought Putin said he was brilliant, typical. So one day, two conmen decided to take advantage of him by saying they were excellent weavers and could make the most wonderful fabric in the world. They told him they could make samples of materials of rich colors with a specific feature. They were invisible and rendered stupid or incapable of anyone doing their job. I digress again. All that glitters isn't gold. This reminds me of someone so desperate to have a Gucci bag or a Rolex watch that they'd believe any smooth-talking salesman in a Thai market, for example, would sell them for a fake one for the real one at a bargain price. The conmen ordered the finest materials, but secretly sold them on the side so they could keep the money. To fool the emperor and his servants, they started to weave, but there was nothing. The king grew suspicious and sent his most loyal servants to check. When they saw that they couldn't allege the fabric, they were scared. They'd get fired, or being stupid or incompetent for not doing their jobs. The irony, I digress again. They were feeling the exact same sense of stupidity and incompetence the king was feeling, the mirroring effect. This is why they lied and said they saw the invisible fabrics. In the end, the emperor decided to go with his helpers and see the fabrics for himself and see how the weavers were doing. Everyone was afraid to come off as a stupid person, so they continued to fool each other so they could see this invisible fabric. They advised the king to put on the nothing fabric himself. The conmen carefully brought out the garments made up of a cape, pants, and a coat. But in reality, the conmen were empty-handed. This reminds me of the ostrich burying its head in the sand, a typical English expression that we use. This applies to a person or persons that don't want to face the reality of some awkward truths. The emperor took off his clothes and allowed the conmen to dress him in his invisible clothes. And his obedient servants held up the cape as the king started the procession. Everyone walked behind him with a dignified air, as onlookers admired the king in his new clothes, until one boy shouted from the crowd, "The emperor has no clothes on." Reality shattered the illusion. Now for my critical reflection on how it plays in society today. I think this story talks about the king's fear of embracing the role of leadership and not having the wisdom, competence, and the intelligence to handle the duties of the office. This is why he was so obsessed with his outer appearance, which he used as a distraction. Our society is full of these typical scenarios where someone pursues position with the trappings of power without wanting to invest the time, energy, and dedication to perform the tasks demanded of him or her. And in a lot of these cases, such people as the king depend heavily on their right arm men, women to do the heavy lifting without ever giving them praise or appreciation, expecting people to cover their incompetence with an air of entitlement. The vanity part of the story is tapping into today's society's need to put one's best foot forward with immaculate attire without possessing any real meat to the bone, good policies to support and cater to people's basic needs. Therefore, if I look the part, I must be good enough. Let's look at the sentence that really unravels and gets to the core of the king's fears. The con men told him the fabric had a specific feature. They were invisible to anyone who was stupid or incapable of doing his job. And right there, the con men called his bluff. The con men dared the king to prove them wrong. I digress again. This reminds me of a politician, financial player, and former president that will remain unnamed and who was so in awe of himself while he was running for the highest office in the land. But he didn't realize, as president, he was in over his head. He most definitely couldn't handle the weight of the office. So what he did was try and run the White House like a gambling casino, or use blatant lies to cover up his ineptitude. We continue with the next sentence. The emperor sent his most loyal servants to check up on the con men to see if they were making his clothes. This is rich people. The king didn't have the guts to discover the truth himself, exploiting his helpers to deal with the responsibility of confronting the crooks and their ill-gotten gains, whatever that may have been. We all know a trap was set to expose the king for the fraud that he is, putting his helpers in a difficult position to go along with this lie, so he could accuse his helpers of being what the king really is, a total wimp, lacking any backbone to stand up to these con men. So, what did the servants do? Because the fear of being fired was so painful to them, they decided to tell the king they saw the invisible fabrics when they arrived at the palace. The servants smartly turned the tables on the king and decided to have him deal with the situation himself. Good for them. All too often, the helpers are written off as stupid, dim-witted lowlifes who need to be told what to do. Everyone who accompanied him was afraid they'd come off as stupid people, so they admired the fabric. that wasn't there and advised the king to put on the nothing on himself. Brilliant. I digress. Talk about putting the king in the hot seat. So the king saw himself then was absolutely nothing and allowed the conman to dress him in his invisible clothes while he remained stark and naked. By now, he most definitely deserved to be humiliated. And consequently, he was, as the procession began, people admired the king until one voice of consciousness shouted out the obvious from the crowd. The king has no clothes on. The illusion was completely shattered. Well, somebody had to knock some sense into him because he was too weak to see the truth. And I don't believe it was the servant's responsibility to bear the weight of the king's inability to recognize the truth when he was clearly staring him in the face. This is most unfortunate and could have been avoided if only his loyal servants didn't fear the king so much. This story made me think of a lot of the rich and powerful people, including politicians. And oddly enough, these people tend to have overinflated egos that make it difficult to be in their presence. Let's talk about the vocabulary that comes to mind. Narcissism, vanity, narcissistic personality disorder, egoism, egocentric, and on and on. But first, let's talk about the difference between vanity, narcissistic personality disorder. Vanity refers to someone who is very concerned with their appearance. I digress. This is why the king didn't have the character to see what was right in front of him. If you're so concerned with what's going on the outside, then you never get to develop the internal substance to form a real personality. Narcissism is a synonym for vanity. However, a narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health condition with traits that may include an excessive need for attention, an inflated sense of self-importance, and lack of empathy. So it's easy to confuse the two. When I read this story, I was immediately triggered by a particular politician and president who will remain unnamed, who exhibited all these traits mentioned in the NPD description. But without diagnosis, one can only speculate. However, I'm not a psychiatrist, but as a survivor of parental narcissistic abuse, I think I have a legitimate reason to counter the naysayers' protests. And without painting a broad brush, at least this unnamed politician exhibits some of a narcissistic personality disorder without necessarily possessing the mental health conditions. For example, this unnamed politician engaged press by gaslighting them, which means to manipulate someone using psychological methods into questioning their own sanity or powers of reasoning when he was confronted with the facts about an issue he couldn't deal with. Typical. He demonstrated a total lack of empathy. Another narcissistic personality disorder favorite, or disregarded a mother's grief who lost her daughter in a white supremacist march, which he gladly defended the rioters. He actually said that she was exaggerating. when she said that her daughter was dead and that she went to go and visit her daughter on a cold concrete slab. I don't think there's any exaggeration there. And lastly, he constantly used bullying tactics and threatened to fire his staff to toe the line at his every wish. I was also struck by how the style of leadership from when this story was written and how it's very similar to what we are experiencing today throughout society, corporations, and the political arena. Stirring up a sense of fear in order to control employees so they can robotically perform tasks to achieve a leader's vision, and threatening the situation of being fired if you dare not follow everything to a T. Here's a quote from Zig Ziglar. If you look after your employees, the employees will take care of the company itself. I believe the old style of leadership, as mentioned above, is finally coming to a screeching halt. I hope so. Now for the trigger points. Now, the trigger points I explained last week, but I'm going to continue to explain it for a while longer. A trigger point or a trigger is a situation, an event, a trauma, a pain, a memory of some devastating situation that took place in the past that may have led you to some very self-destructive tendencies. And it could be 10 years later, a trigger from the past comes back and hits you in the reality, when your reality is completely changed. And sometimes, because we don't understand and realize it's a trigger, we can be tempted to go all the way back to our self-destructive tendencies or behavior because we don't know how to handle a trigger. And in these podcasts, I try to point out the triggers and to point out our abilities maybe to handle them. Okay, let's start off with the trigger point number 1. When they saw that they couldn't allege the fabric, they were scared they'd get fired for being stupid or incompetent, for not doing their jobs. A lot of leaders use fear to control their employees. When a leader sets the tone to put his employees first in a company, they feel safe and remarkable things can happen. But when a leader does the reverse, different things happen. Fear, lies, the idea that you are just a number is very familiar to a lot of people when they're in this type of company. And in 2008, this was very prominent for a lot of people. In 2008, we had the economic crisis, and loads of people were fired, just loads. It started off in the United States, and then it basically ricocheted all over the world. It hit Europe really bad, especially Spain. They had to ask for a financial rescue. You could be fired with no regard, just no regard. And in 2008, it was even more prevalent when CEOs sacrifice their employees for the numbers. Well, the numbers didn't match up in 2008, nor in 2009, 10, maybe 11 either. So thousands upon thousands of people lost their jobs. But if you compare what happened in 2008 and you compare it to 2020 when we had the pandemic, thousands of people lost their jobs, especially in the hospitality sector. But even though we were reminded of the 2008 economic downfall, it didn't affect us quite the same. Yes, thousands of people lost their jobs, but thousands of people were able to keep their jobs in remote working. And it turned out that the pandemic was in some ways a blessing in disguise because it helped people to realize that they could work from home and they could enjoy more flexi time when they were working at home and they were working inside the company. The pandemic, the healthcare issue was a big problem. But then it looked as though that with sharing companies, sharing space, that would turn out to be a much better alternative than a company renting out a whole building. So there were some really interesting benefits that came out of this awful pandemic. And I would say awful. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost their jobs. But there were things that were different from 2008. So we didn't go all the way back. We almost went all the way back, but we caught ourselves and we went forward instead. So that's the trigger. But we didn't go all the way backwards. We stopped at midstream and continued going forwards again. Found alternatives. Number two, they were invisible and rendered stupid or incapable of anyone doing their job. Unnamed politician. The irony, they were feeling the exact same sense of stupidity and incompetence. The king was feeling the mirroring effect. This is why they lied and said they saw the invisible fabrics. Now, today, if you think of 2008, even 5 years ago, employees were more than willing to just lie. Just lie, accept a lie, speak forth a lie, just so they could hold on to their job. People were willing to stay in a job that they were unhappy in, make money, wear clothes that they didn't particularly want to wear, and buy things for their homes just to impress people that they don't like. But not anymore. Something changed. And this is the trigger point that didn't take us all the way back again. It took us in the opposite direction. Instead of functioning off of the lies to keep a job, we created our own work. We created our own companies. So many people creating online work and companies for themselves instead of working for a boss or working for a company that they don't have any respect for. Working for ourselves, we created a space to feel emancipated as employees, as employers, and as people. And we created our own flexi time. We can work whenever we want to. And we can live in whatever country we desire. Because we're no longer afraid of being fired or working for a company like a robot that we don't particularly really respect the manager or the owner. That's great. And the last one, the boy shouted, "The king has no clothes on." The voice of consciousness that woke the king up. This reminded me of a company that I used to work for. I used to teach in company classes, business classes in Barcelona. And this particular company was a huge multinational company. And one day, my student said to me, "Oh, I have to do this meeting." So I said, "Oh, good, okay. So it should be good." And he was the operations, he was the operations controller, head of operations. And he said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Do you mind if I ask what this meeting is going to be about?" He said, "It's going to be about the company implementing change into the system." And I said, "Oh." I said, "How are you going to present it?" And he said, "I'm just going to tell them that these are the changes that we're going to implement into the system." Basically, he didn't say this, but I could see from his face, take it or leave it, take it or walk. And I said to him, I said, maybe we could work with another approach. I said, employees do not like change. They resist change. So instead of making these employees feel hostile or want to resist what you're speaking about as far as presenting change, why don't you let them know what the benefits are to the changes that you're going to make in the system and in the company? Tell me what they are. He said flexi time, more specific work-related tasks. I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. If you present it like these are the benefits that you're going to get from the changes that we make in the company, that's night and day for them. They won't resist as much. And you'll find people responding in a much more positive way than you expected." I said, "Maybe you could try that." So he did. A couple of days later, he came back. He said, "Melody, the meeting went very well." And as I told them about the benefits, I said, "Yes, because people are always, especially employees, always looking for benefits." He said they were nodding their head. "I agree, I agree, I agree, I agree." I said, "Well done for you. Well done." So those are the three trigger points, okay? He changed, instead of going all the way back and sort of taking the hard line, he decided to mix it up a bit and address the needs and the interests of his employees, and he got a great result. So this is the end of today's segment, and I would just like to leave you with the Zig Ziglar quote: "If you take care or look after the employees will take care of the company." So thank you very much for listening. Stay blessed and see you next time. Bye-bye.